Welcome everybody, my name is Mindy. I'm an evaluator with Arbor Consulting Partners, and we have amazing panelists. I'm just going to say their names and their affiliations now, and then before they speak I will give you a little bit more information about their backgrounds, which is very impressive. Not in order. Rebecca, who is right here in the middle. Rebecca Donham, Senior Program Officer with MetroWest Community Healthcare Foundation. John Feinman, Executive Director of InnerCity Weightlifting, and Anisha Chablani-Medley, who is the Chief Knowledge Officer from Roca. And while we don't really have the time to go around and say, all your names and where you're from, we do want to get a little sense of kind of why you're in this room. So can you just tell us, are you here as a nonprofit person who works at a nonprofit organization? Would you mind just raising your hand for a minute as a nonprofit? Okay, great. And how many people come from the funding world? Okay, a little smattering. How many of you have worked with evaluation, done evaluation within your organizations? Okay, a couple of people. And how many of you have worked with outside evaluators? Okay, a little bit of that. So within the group who have worked with outside evaluators, now we're getting down to a very small cell. How many of you have done sort of a combination of trying to build internal systems and working with outside evaluators? Okay, a little bit of that. All righty, well, so let's get rolling here. I think, first of all, the context in which we're talking about these issues, that we are in tight economic times, but at the same time, we're in a world where people really want to know, is what I do effective? Is it really having the impact that I want it to have? That's within organizations as well as within foundations. And also, for foundations, they want to know if they're investing in the kinds of things that are having the impact that they're intended to have. So, there's a lot of, on that side, push to go for evaluation. At the same time, we're in this sort of tight economic situation. So, how do we work collaboratively? How do we not short shrift the kind of work that can come out in terms of the use of evaluation data? Build systems within organizations so that it can be effective. So, and I think especially what we're looking at today is how nonprofits and foundations can work collaboratively together to kind of meet this mission, to understand, the effectiveness of the work, the value of the investment, and really, hopefully, produce really quality programs. So a lot of times when I'm working with folks on evaluation, we ask this very basic question, which is, who is doing what and for what purpose? And we're trying to look at, who wants to know what for what purpose. So who wants to know what's going on within your organization? Why do they want to know that? And what will they do with that information? And what we often find is that the who and the want comes, but not the how to use the information. In other words, a lot of people, evaluators will help people collect information, nonprofits will collect that data and they'll have it, and a lot of times it doesn't get used as effectively. It doesn't get disseminated as well as it could. The other piece is that many times people see evaluation and program design as two very separate things, which can be problematic, so that if a program gets developed without thinking about, with doing that kind of reflective practice and questioning what is it that we're doing that works and what is it we're doing that we really need to shift or think differently about, it creates a little bit more of a haphazard situation. So I think that we on this panel probably share this kind of basic idea that evaluation and program design really go hand in hand, and that that's a really important thing. I know that as an evaluator over the years, because I've worked on big, sort of big federal funded evaluations as well as with smaller nonprofits and medium groups, and usually at the federal level what they want is this fancy quasi-experimental design with control groups and treatment groups, and it's all very expensive and very complicated. And in the end, actually, if you look at where the money has gone within that project, you see that a huge amount has gone towards evaluation. And I've actually worked on one project where in the end we felt that even though the evaluation had to happen because the feds wanted it, the program didn't get enough money to succeed. And so that's not good. How do we take the learning from that, even though I think the ultimate idea was, we're going to get this great data and that's going to inform policy, and yes, Congress is just going to change its mind and put tons of money into this kind of program or that or whatever. But so I think we're trying to think more creatively. How do we think about perhaps the flashpoints where evaluation expertise can be utilized, but at the same time, the internal resources for evaluation are utilized, whether there's some kind of a collaboration there, and to think about the nonprofit world working very collaboratively with the foundation world to bring in all the resources and think about how to make it work collaboratively all around. So I want to say a simple thing about methods, which is oftentimes people think in this universe that hard data is statistical data, and I wouldn't disagree with that as somebody who does mixed methods kind of work. I think that that's true, but a lot of times we see that it's the stories that really need to get out there. So there's some perhaps combination of the stories combined with the numbers that make the strongest arguments. And I'll just give you a brief example of one organization that I'm about to work with that we actually had proposed this quasi-experimental study as well as some case studies, and then the money didn't come through at the level they wanted it, and we said, okay, well, what can we do with this to really make things work? And what we decided was that we would work with them to strengthen their theory of change, and that we would help align all their protocols that they use to have it kind of fit with their theory of change, and that we would do one case study that really was kind of an exemplar program that they wanted to be able to raise more money for around the country, and so that is what we're doing. It's just one example, but how do you deal with less money but the need to really generate the kind of data that makes a strong argument? Just a quick word, just the importance of developing an evaluation plan. Again, as we see, evaluation and program design is something that goes hand in hand. In order to have that happen, there needs to be some real thinking up front about what is the plan for doing the evaluation. and I think our speakers are going to speak to that specifically, so I'm not going to go a lot into that. But you often need, some people might say a champion, or somebody, you might say somebody who has the resources internally, who knows enough about how to work with quote-unquote data, with information, which is what data is, to help synthesize what you're learning about your program and put it to use for strategic planning. So moving from backward data to going forward with strategic planning. I think that donors and foundations can play a really important role in helping this process of articulating an evaluation plan and articulating a research design and work collaboratively with nonprofits to sort of promote that happening. But as important as it is to do that upfront planning, it is equally important to make sure that whatever data comes out of all the work that's been put into the evaluation, to really use that data. So we've seen some of the reports that we've written go into the waste bin, or collecting dust bunnies, but we've also now, I think, over time, with the group that I work with, have seen more proactive use, not just for internal improvement within programs, but also trying to affect the broader national language discussion, rather, or state discussion about whatever the work is. And it's very encouraging to see evaluation data be used, because that's the whole point, right? There are some funders who are new to the dialogue, and some who are vets. And so I guess one way we could think of it is that some funders have an evaluation culture and some do not. So from a nonprofit perspective, you may be up against trying to educate and work with and kind of pull in funders who don't have that kind of understanding. Those funders that really have that kind of understanding, and I'm sure the people who are here from the foundation world, you have a much more open dialogue, and perhaps you could even strategize with those funders about how to work with others to open the dialogue around doing evaluation work. So I guess my final phrase will be evaluation culture before I introduce these folks, because I think that having an evaluation culture both within your organization as well as within a foundation is really critical to get the ball rolling on this work, and to be thinking critically to really promote reflective practice that is meaningful for improving programs, utilizing the information, disseminating it, and hopefully having the broadest impact that we could possibly have on the folks that we're trying to reach. So I am going to introduce our first speaker, and I'm going in order of the program, so I'm not showing any preferences here. So our first speaker is Rebecca Donham. She's, again, Senior Program Officer of MetroWest Health Foundation, which is an independent philanthropy addressing unmet health needs of a 25-town area west of Boston. Before she was at this foundation, she was a program officer at the Foundation for MetroWest, which used to be called Crossroads Community Foundation in Natick. She also was a program associate at Associated Grant Makers in Boston. I'm not done. I'm still bragging about you. So Rebecca has been the Director of Development at the Center for Literacy in Philadelphia and in the Development Office of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She has her BA from Haverford College and MPA from University of Pennsylvania, and she's on the board of the Mass Commission on the Status of Women, the Mass Nonprofit Network, and the MetroWest Nonprofit Network.
Okay.
Busy person.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to see a lot of universities doing these kind of young givers groups more and more. So just a quick, very, very quick point about the foundation I work for, which helps give you some context. We're what's known in the business as a hospital conversion foundation. That's when a hospital converts from a nonprofit hospital to a for-profit hospital, and the assets are put into a foundation. So that means we are very, very locally based. Everyone thinks the money is theirs. Also, sort of MetroWest does not have a huge number of nonprofits, so it means that we are very interested in building the capacity of the health organizations that are there, because we will be working with them for a long time. We make about $5 billion in grants a year, so we're sort of a big fish in a small-ish pond. So a couple things that struck me about the title of this workshop. One is sort of it's got collaborate in the name, and I just thought I would sort of share a little bit about my perspective in terms of collaborating with our grantees. Foundations do two things with their assets, right? They invest them for return, and then they give those funds away. The former is very easy to measure, right? You've got the stock market, you've got your benchmarks, the investment committee looks at return and makes adjustments if necessary. The flip side, the investing in grantees, is harder to measure, partly because you are relying on those grantees to sort of give honest feedback, give information that we then use to show our own impact. We have decided that it's very important for us, both being a local foundation and also wanting to really understand how we can better measure our performance. We have tried very hard to improve the capacity of our grantees to measure their results. And we've done that a lot of different ways. We're early adopters of a logic model, requiring our organizations who are applying to complete a logic model. We've done trainings on logic models, bringing people in to do trainings. We have a webinar on our website done by one of our program officers on the logic model itself. We also work with grantees once they are funded to refine their logic models, because often they have overpromised and because they think that will look good. And then I, who will inherit the grant, say, let's stop overpromising and let's now figure out what is realistic. We also fund evaluation. We've done that in different ways. We will fund it as part of staff time in your budget. We actually, a few years ago, added a line item for external evaluation, and we've just taken that off because nobody put in for it. So we figure, don't have it as a line item if nobody's going to take it. And sometimes our staff will decide that a grantee project has either some worth in terms of evaluating for replicability, or we actually think that they need some help designing an evaluation. And we have contracted for and paid for an evaluation to help those grantees. And then the sort of most recent thing we've done, we launched an evaluation institute this past fall, where we invited 10 of our most core grantees to participate. We had 6 accept the invitation. We asked them to participate in teams that had to include at least one senior manager on the team. And we actually included an evaluation of the Evaluation Institute so we can help decide if we're going to do it again. So that's sort of the collaborate part. I feel like we're pretty good on that end. I'd like to think we're on the sort of better end of your continuum there. The second part of the title was practical and sustainable. And one reference material, which I highly recommend, and it's free on a PDF form, is Participatory Evaluation Essentials. It's by Anita Baker, who actually we contracted to do the Evaluation Institute. And she collaborates with Beth Bruner of the Bruner Foundation. And I just sort of want to read a paragraph to you because I think it's really a great quote. Clearly, the ability to conduct or commission an evaluation requires, at a minimum, familiarity with and ideally mastery of a set of skills. Knowing how to frame questions that are important and answerable, knowing how to gather and analyze data systematically, knowing how to synthesize findings and make recommendations. These are fundamental skills that can be learned. Hence our Evaluation Institute. They are a necessary, critical first step for organizations that want to deliver on their missions, but they are not sufficient. For evaluation to claim its central place, these skills need to become second nature, embedded in the culture and practice of the organization. They need to be applied to all operations, not just programs. Organizations need to think evaluatively, to know how to get the data they need, know how to translate it into knowledge and action, and know how to communicate, to manage, to plan, to improve. So, to my mind, it's about the skills, but it's also about having the mindset, and I'm sure the other panelists will talk a little bit about that. And so when I mentioned the Evaluation Institute, I said we had one senior manager, and we also wanted people who were on the data side, so somebody who was operating the data was participating too. And we actually deliberately did not invite development directors, no offense to any development directors, because I think sometimes they really want sort of shiny, pretty logic models that aren't really grounded in sort of what the program is doing. The last thing I have two pieces of advice, and one is to the foundations in the room and to your friends who have foundations, and that is to stop looking for proof of causality. It doesn't exist, and especially for small grants with short durations. Instead, look for evidence of impact. That's far more realistic and accurate assessment of what's going on. And to nonprofits, to stop over-promising. So that will get you in trouble when you come to the end of the grant, and it will undermine what I think we're trying to do here, which is be very realistic about what can happen under the grant.
Thank you. What we've decided is that if people have clarifying questions now, that's fine, but we'd like to hold off the dialogue discussion until everybody has spoken. So anybody have a clarifying question? Okay, so we'll move on. Thank you. It's always good to have a piece of advice at the end, too. So our next speaker is John Feinman, as I said, founder and executive director of InnerCity Weightlifting. John received his MBA from Babson College and his bachelor's in marketing from Bryant University. Before he founded InnerCity Weightlifting, John was a 4-year starting athlete for the men's varsity soccer team at Bryant University. He ran his own personal training practice, and he completed a year of Athletes in Service to America, which I believe was part of AmeriCorps. Yeah? Okay, where he worked with court-involved youth and learned that weightlifting could provide a hook to get youth off the streets and engaged in positive opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk very briefly about who we are, what we do, and going into our third year now, kind of the challenges that we've seen in developing our data and how we've gone about refining and honing in on our theory of change and developing our outcomes and measures. Very briefly, we work with the highest risk young people in Boston for violence in order to reduce youth violence by getting these young people off the streets and into the gym. And when we say the highest risk for violence, there's a very small population, about 240 to 300 young people that the police and community is very aware of, who are, according to the police, the most likely to either shoot someone or get shot. This is the population that we seek out for our program. our vision is to end youth violence by creating a systemic change that can change community norms so that our students don't find themselves isolated on the streets anymore, but instead overwhelmed with support. Research out of the Crime and Justice Institute suggests that there are what they call the big four risk factors for recidivism. And that's antisocial personality, meaning is the young person impulsive? Antisocial peers, are they hanging out with groups of friends who are breaking the law? Antisocial attitude, are they in a sense stuck on the street? And antisocial behavior, meaning are they actually breaking the law? So in order for a young person in our program to succeed in any of our workforce development tracks or in the academic world, and really for us to succeed on our vision, before we do anything else, we need to address these risk factors. So what we do is we simply start by decreasing time on the street. Weightlifting provides a hook that can, if nothing else, take a couple hours off the street and get a young person into our gym. Our next challenge is that can we leverage that time to increase what we call their pro-social choices? Can we get them to rely on our coaches, rely on our support networks? Are we able to refer them into other programs, and then are they able to stick with those other programs? And then lastly, can we build this support system, increase these pro-social choices, so that a couple years down the road, we can actually effectively end and reduce youth violence. So all that being said, we've grown to include from 4 to more than 200 students in our first 2 years. The demand for our program completely outweighs the resources that we have. Our net promoter score, which I'll get into in a little bit, meaning how likely is a young person in our program to refer a friend, is 100% for the students that we target and got into the program. There have been a lot of challenges as we started to hone in on our theory of change, being a young organization, how much we can afford in terms of data and evaluation. So when we looked at it, we really thought, how are we going to be able to improve our impact through what we're measuring? What's going to really tell us what we're doing is working? And we're working with young people who, again, are the most likely to commit a crime tomorrow. So how do we create a measure for a student calling us up saying, I want to change my life? A student calling us up saying, can you help me get back into school? Even a month ago, one of our recruits, unfortunately, was murdered. The day of his funeral, one of our coaches went out, picked up a bunch of his friends, got them into the gym. They came in understandably upset. Next thing we know, some of our older, more high-profile students go over to these young people. They put their arms around them. They're talking, not about the situation that happened, but just making sure that they're in there having fun, enjoying themselves. The next thing we know, a half hour later, students are laughing, weights are being lifted, everyone's talking. There's a very positive atmosphere in the gym. How do we create a measure that captures that? So when we started looking at this and really looking at our first outcome, which is can we decrease time on the street, first thing we thought is retention is our most important measure. Because if a young person is not in our program, they're not coming back, then we have no chance to change this young person. From there, we can then start to track frequency, and not necessarily frequency in the gym, but how often is one of our coaches reaching out to our student, and then more important, how often reaching out to our coaches. Our second outcome, how do we measure increased pro-social choices? That's where net promoter score is really our most important measure overall. And the reason being is that no longer is a student just trying to change themselves. Now they're actually changing the entire dynamic of their friends. So it goes right back into that antisocial peers. They're actually working with us to change the dynamic of their friends, the dynamic of that gang to become a more positive culture. And as a young organization, it's incredibly simple for us to measure. I mean, the fact is they show up with their friends, so easy to check that one off. It doesn't cost us any money. And it shows that, if nothing else, we built a foundation to be successful on. And the last one is, how do we define or measure our third outcome of increased public safety? And we look to recidivism for that. Again, that's a tricky one, especially with our population, because from talking with the police, the young people we're working with, the recidivism rate is not your typical 44% within first year of release. It's 100% if you're asking them. And not only that, it's 100% for a pretty awful crime. So we track both violent and nonviolent reoffense, as well as the period of time that this person's able to remain outside of prison. Of the 41 students that we have in that target category, meaning on that what's called the PAC list, we have 17 students who are enjoying the longest period of their life out of jail right now. So again, it's kind of very simple metrics that we use that have been developed not to pitch to a funder, but for us to make sure that we're allocating the right resources. So we know if a student hasn't been reached out to or isn't reaching out to us, we need to allocate more resources to that student. And we, at this point in our lives as an organization, we don't have the luxury of being able to afford an evidence-based practice, but we can by all means use that research to suggest where we should be looking at to indirectly show what we're doing. So when we do get to a point, we can become more like, I'll point out Roca, because we've talked to them several times, and we think very highly of their measurement system and data evaluation. And I think what you'll hear from really all of us is that they're not two separate things. It's evaluation is impact. It's how we better define what we're doing, how we can codify our results and improve overall what our vision is.
Okay, excellent, great, thank you very much. And I, as a Jewish mother, I can't stop myself. I'm going to pass around this chocolate. It's nice chocolate. Great. Help yourself. 30 minutes left. Okay, we're going to move along. So, and our last speaker is Anisha Chablani, who's the Chief Knowledge Officer at Roca. And Roca is a nonprofit organization that demonstrates effectiveness in producing outcomes with very high-risk young adults ages 17 to 24. Anisha has over 15 years of direct service experience working with very high-risk young adults and has over 8 years of program and organizational management experience. Anisha has supported the development of Roca's intervention model, performance management systems, and staff development and training.
I'll try to just be brief so we can kind of get to the dialogue, but I really appreciate listening. And just to say, I wish we were as clear as you were 3 years in. Roca's about 24 years old, and it has gone through a lot of different iterations over time. It was a multi-service center, sort of a all-encompassing community-based grassroots organization, and over the years really evolved into who we are today. And part of how we got to be who we are today is because of the drive toward evaluation and measuring impact and outcomes. There was a point in time in our history where we had to kind of stop and think about if we were really helping the young people we were serving change their lives, stop going to jail, stop getting arrested, stop getting hurt, stop causing harm. And the answer was no. That we could engage them. They were in the building. We were doing things with them, but we didn't quite have the right formula to really understand and figure out what we had to do to help them change behaviors that would help them move to the kind of outcomes we were hoping for. And so we had to do some real serious research and understanding and learning and looking at the world and looking at our experience, because it's not like nothing worked. I mean, we're delivering. Nonprofits are really good at delivering to funders. When funders say, hey, we want to know how many of these, or what about this, or but it was this deeper drive that we had to sort of say, we wanted to be an organization that was actually of impact to the young people we were serving. And we had to figure out how to do that better and how to measure it, otherwise we had to shut the doors. Because the group that we're serving, it's, what John's talking about, they've been engaged in a lot of really stupid things, and no need for any more stupid stuff at 24 years old. You sort of got to get onto it and got to get onto the time. You don't have enough time at that point. So we really started, we went through a theory of change process and really started from this perspective of what now everyone talks about as performance management, right? And I want to bring that concept up because it is the complete precursor to evaluation, right? Most nonprofits don't know what it is that they're actually, if their activities that they're deciding are, why are we doing them? Is there evidence that these things are going to be effective in driving toward the outcomes? How do we measure that and monitor our performance as an organization? Are we even implementing them the way we're supposed to? How not even getting the causality, but are we doing a good job? You can have the best ambitions and the best goals and the best logic model design, but are the workers doing, what it is that we say we do, and how do we know that? So we started at this very, very basic point too of saying, the most fundamental thing for us getting young people outcomes was similar, this idea of engagement. could we get young people who've not been engaged in relationships engaged and retaining in relationships? So we developed a whole way of measuring engagement in relationships with our youth workers. And we did a lot of research and study, and our model was based on the Prochaska stages of change, because the idea was we have to change behaviors. And so we set up a system to be able to monitor and look at how young people are moving through those stages of change and their readiness to change behaviors way early from getting to any sort of real performance indicators or outcomes. Our model is it was a 3-year intensive intervention with 2 years of follow-up. Based on looking at all our data, we decided to shorten it to 2 years, because some of the ones who were hanging around longer started getting a little too comfortable, so we had to. But because we had this whole system set up, we could pull it back and say, nope, we've got the formula right, here's the dosage, here's what we're doing. So we built and we learned at the same time, and being able to have measures that were meaningful to us in understanding if what we were doing mattered to these young people. We've been able to really keep developing the expertise that will prepare us for an impact evaluation, right? I say that because I don't even think still that we're quite ready for an impact evaluation, mostly because we still have to work with evaluators and figure out how to set up control groups for a group that doesn't want to show up or doesn't want to be engaged. But I think that what Mindy said and what John said and Rebecca said is that this idea that program and evaluation go together, right? And that if there are sets of things that we want to do to help move the needle, then it sort of has to be here's what we're doing, here's why we think that's important, and here's how we're going to track that to test it. And how frequently are we looking at our own data to really understand if it's of value and if we're making those moves, or when we need to change something, and get ourselves to a better place so that we can do what we say we're supposed to do for these young people that we serve. So I'll stop at that.
Okay, great. Thank you. In between class. Okay, so we have about, 15 minutes or so?
A little bit more.
Okay, great. So I'd like to open it up to you folks, and please just feel free. Questions and comments, yeah. And can I just, interject? Could you just introduce yourself, just your name and your organization?
I'm Joanna Girl Associates. I advise a number of organizations, so I was very stunned by some set up not having directors of development involved in some of your trainings, and it's done something really strongly that organizations are not siloed, that siloed organizations that don't include development or don't include programming, don't include a lot of things are not usually very effective. So I obviously need to change that and think that development people don't need to be involved in evaluation. Are there any other parts of organizations that you would X out of being involved in evaluations?
And I guess I would say we had to limit the number of people who could attend, so I wanted sort of the senior leaders, and I wanted people who were really on the ground doing the data. So it's not that if I had more people, but I didn't want this to be about development directors sort of improving their, because often what we have found is that we'll get a proposal, and then I'll go meet with the program director at the start of the grant, and we'll go over the logic model, and what they'll say is, I don't know why we promised that, because that's our development director wrote it, and I'm a former development director. I'm totally including myself here. So what I really find is I want to get sort of the on the ground sort of people who will have to deliver the product to be sort of rooted in evaluation, whether it's sort of leadership or the data person or sort of the program manager. Certainly in terms of, the trainings we have on our website, those are geared towards writing a logic model. So if your development person is writing it, that will be helpful to them. So I guess I don't mean to be excluding for the sake of excluding, but more including the people that I find actually really need in terms of embedding sort of a culture of it. And it's hard because often development people are sort of stuck off and they're sort of told to write a grant and they're not sort of included in the sort of culture of the organization. So I guess I'm going to answer it a slightly different way and just say I think it's really important that the person who will program and the funding, they need to be able to feel comfortable owning the deliverable and owning the promise. Because a grant is sort of a promise in terms of delivering the outcomes. And I want them to feel comfortable that what has been promised is, they feel fully comfortable with that. I've answered it a different way.
I think there's one question that often gets raised when you're thinking about the level of participation in either training or even the evaluation process, which is, who is developing the standards by which you are being judged. And so, if you look at the spectrum of participatory evaluation to the kind where somebody comes in from the outside and has no relationship to the organization whatsoever, on the participatory end, we've worked with evaluation in which the clients or whoever's being served sit side by side with the staff of all levels and start thinking about those questions. But sometimes it's a question of resources. Sometimes it's a question of how you're going to have the most fruitful discussion. So, in our experience, you just think about what do you want to accomplish in this particular dialogue. And I think that is helpful just to hear that was an example of how you selected to do it that way. So, other questions? Yeah. Please.
Yeah, I'm John Sarvey. I work here at the School of Public Policy at Northeastern. I know it's challenging enough to have full and robust evaluation for one program or organization, and yet my question is about something even more ambitious, which is usually when we say changing the needle, we're not really referring to one program, we're really referring to community-wide, like the overall statistic of whatever in the community. So that's even more challenging, right? And so my question has to do with the extent to which there could be some degree of the pros and cons of some degree of standardizing some outcomes so that they can be aggregated. Now I know there's usually a lot of resistance and the reasons against it are strong, but unless there are some outcomes that can be adopted by a lot of programs, then we'll never be able to add up outcomes, right? For measuring a degree of impact broader than just program by program.
So, who wants to take that?
I would just say I think an interesting piece of that has to be the state and the municipalities. Ultimately, our outcomes are reducing recidivism and employment, right? For a particular group of very defined target population, we can't get recidivism data in the state because they don't collect it. It's crazy, right? So I think nonprofits have an absolute accountability of tracking outcomes. If there are some standards across the board in similar, but people group things together too. It's quite, frustrating. So I think part of that question has to be, where's the state in their willingness to actually track and share? I'd rather be held up against a standard of being able to run third-party data on the young people we're serving to see if we're impacting than to be asked to collect another outcome measure. So as long as they're at the table having that dialogue and conversation, and we can get to a point where sharing information and holding, some of our departments as accountable as we do our nonprofits, then although we're not all held that accountable, but we got to raise it up for everybody. It's crazy. But that, to me, that would be the way to really look at those kind of measures, because technically we're supposed to be doing that anyway. How do you? I don't know.
I come from an arts organization, so my background is, different. But are you familiar with cultural data projects?
We have a link to it on our website.
So, I think that is
What's the cultural difference?
No,
It's
actually, I'm not.
I'm actually not even sure.
Is it Pew? Is it Pew?
Where?
But there are a lot of funders who, or the foundation, yeah, who have basically signed on and are encouraging more and more arts organizations to participate in this project, and then they're actually asking for reports from this database that measure all kinds of outcomes, including from a financial perspective. So I think in some sectors you're really starting to see that happen.
Okay, so I think trying to go in order. Could you go next?
Sure.
And again, same name.
Steve Pratt with Food Clouds, and just wondering, in this conversation I haven't heard too much about the notion of using evaluation to actually reflect on and improve practice. And I'm wondering to what degree these evaluation systems, very expensive systems, are being set up as compliance tools for external parties versus tools for actually asking the basic question, are we being effective and how could we be better? And I know your organizations well enough to know that your values are very much aligned with that question. So I guess I'm more interested in, so how is Roca, how is InnerCity Weightlifting using data to reflect on your own practice and try to improve it?
I think the first part that really helped us out when we honed in on our theory of change and really started developing much more concise outcomes and measures is on our own internal practices. We've been fortunate to get some great weightlifters into the gym to help coach our students, but that's not what we're about. We're not trying to turn the next Olympic lifting athlete for the 2012 Olympics. These guys are coming to the gym and working with some of the most high-impact gang members in the city. And one of the things that ended up being incredibly beneficial that we didn't even necessarily foresee is the communication internally that happened around this, and how all of a sudden we had this new team of volunteers really taking to the mission and their purpose in the gym, which is not to get a kid to lift 500 pounds and send him off to London, but to get a kid to call you later on that day and saying, hey, I really want to get back into school. It's our own internal practices that kind of then start to drive all these outcomes and measures. So I think that's where it really helped the most. And at this point, we don't have the luxury of having a very complicated or time-consuming or expensive database system. So we need to kind of meet weekly, talk about how each student is going, just go down the list of especially our target students who are going to need the most resources to make sure that we're allocating the resources that we do have properly. And that's where it's really been incredibly helpful at just improving our own practices, but driving that final outcome as well.
I would just say, I mean, part of what helped us is, we did our theory of change and laid out everything and really worked from, and I mean, this is truly, and I think nonprofits have to step up in their own accountability of going like, not just what are we reporting to funders, but what impact are we trying to have as an organization, getting very clear and very committed to putting a stake in the ground around delivering. Our system was then set up to reinforce the model and to track indicators for us that told us if we were going in the right direction in that model or not. It's actually so not a compliant system. We have to do a lot of extraction to, all the data's in there somewhere, but we actually have to do a lot of extraction for reporting for grants or for funding that has, we want to know this many of this or whatever. Some people set up their data systems that way. We set up our performance management system to really be able to track and monitor our progress and performance based on indicators we felt were critical to moving young people to the outcomes we were talking about. So it was a flip on how our approach to setting it up was. And I actually think nonprofits give away ownership of outcomes too much to funders, to different, whatever. We have like 80 different grants. There's no way I could set up a system for compliance, right? It's just sort of like, here's a stake in the ground, here's the outcomes we're driving to, here are performance indicators, and we own that, and we report out to you based on what you're funding us for. But a lot of nonprofits take the back seat, and let the funders drive that, and then they get in a mentality of, I have to comply, so how do I set that up to do that the easiest way? instead of going, no, what is it that we say we want to do here, and what impact we want to have, and what are going to be our benchmarks for understanding that we're getting there, keeping in mind what we have to be responsible for. But I think it's an ownership and accountability piece that nonprofits historically haven't had to hold either, and in lieu of not doing that, funders kind of drove an evaluation frame or drive. But I think where nonprofits take that ownership back, you can really design and set up something that's meaningful to really. I mean, we changed our whole model just recently. This July, we reduced it a whole year because we were looking at it and said, looking at the research, because you have to keep looking at that, and looked at our own data, and we said, nope. And if we hadn't had that, we just would have kept doing what we were doing and reporting on our outcomes. Instead, we're going, nope, this is where we're hitting our impact points. This is where we're not. Here are how people are doing. Let's change this. We had to reframe the timeline for but it's because we set it up in a way that's useful for us to do that. And it's ownership.
Okay, so let's see. You were actually next as a speaker. Do you still want to say something? Or?
Well, I was just going to sort of comment.
Could you also say your name?
Oh, sorry. I'm Emily Han. I'm from Northeastern University in the Human Services Program. And I have this problem with the standardized aggregate assessment problem issue. I sort of lean a little bit in two directions, because I've sort of seen sort of the failures of the standardization of evaluation metrics for NERFA behind the ideas of sort of equal education for all and equal standards is so wonderful and it feels good and it's sort of like a nice warm hug. The reality of testing for that sort of spurs more inequality. And so when I think about, what makes sort of good evaluation, it's sort of what works. And then for whom, this idea of subgroups, and sometimes that means what's going to work for, InnerCity weightlifting is going to be different for Roca, that these are going to be, even in the same region, they're going to be sort of specific to the populations that you're targeting. So what works for whom, when in the developmental cycle, can you put in measures that might be different for someone at 14 versus 15 versus 24, so that development comes into play. And then all of the why piece of it, which is sort of has to do with sort of the theory of change. So I struggle with whether or not, the quantitative side of me that's done large evaluations loves that because it makes it easier. But I'm not quite sure if that works on sort of the micro level in terms of the smaller organization.
Somebody want to comment?
Yeah, again, for us at our stage of development right now, every measure we have in place is kind of driving towards a long-term goal, being able to have our own institutional knowledge and get to a point where like Roca, we can start to determine what really is going well, where our points just need to not be part of the program anymore, or how we really, over the long term, we can codify our results to make sure that we can successfully replicate in other areas. So we have our current goal, which is just being able to track this data simply for the purpose of being able to do our job as best we can with the young people we serve. But then also be able to track that over time so that we can then start to look at, all right, how does this program work for a 12-year-old who's all of a sudden starting to pick up a gun versus someone who's 24 who is kind of at that decision point where, am I going to stay in this life or am I going to leave it behind? And ultimately, we're going to see different strategies working better, I would assume, for different age groups, different people growing up in different areas of the city. There's a ton of different variables. But right now, it's just incredibly focused on what we need to do right now to make sure that we're developing that final outcome of getting this person plugged into our support system and making better decisions.
I'm Chris Navin from Navin Associates. I wanted to build on what John and Anisha and even Rebecca really were saying. You're talking about it, at least John and Anisha are talking about it from the provider's point of view, and it makes a whole lot of sense to be looking at the data that tells you about your program. But to get back to Steve's question about the evaluation, you in your point about planning, developing an evaluation plan, I guess really what I'm trying to do is put in a plug for participatory evaluation, because if the idea of the evaluation is to talk with the people who are running the programs on the ground and ask them, so how do you define success? What does success mean for you, and how does that relate to the logic model and all that? Then you can build an evaluation that is going to be useful for them and can provide information with which they can improve their program. And it's, just from the perspective of someone designing the evaluation, I think that's, and from a funder's perspective, it makes a lot of sense to find out how are they defining, how is the provider defining success, build evaluation around that, and then it's going to be useful as opposed to sitting on the shelf.
Thank you. Well, just a quick follow-up on your question. I guess I would just say, in any of your circumstances, have you actually asked the folks who are part of your programs, what are your goals for this program? Is that a part of the dialogue that you have pursued to think about, I guess getting to Chris's question about, incorporating the perspective of the folks who are being served into the evaluation thinking?
I'm just this little white guy from Amherst, Massachusetts. I don't know anything about what it's like growing up on the streets. I've never been shot. I've never shot anyone. I've never grown up in a household with a lot of the complicating factors that our students have. So 6 years ago when I kind of got this idea to start InnerCity Weightlifting, this is I was working with a group of young people in a gang called MS-13, and I couldn't get them into any other program. So I started asking, what are you interested in? And all of a sudden, weightlifting was this common interest that could get them, if nothing else, off the streets and for a couple hours a day, make it so that they can have some fun, no one's worrying about them, and they're going to stay out of trouble. But then we kept the conversation going. And a lot of the students, and I think this is where Roca has done an incredibly good job as well, is that's not really, the street is not what they choose. It's just more often than not the life that they know. So they want their GED or diploma or whatever level of education they want, but there's no one in our program that would say, no, I don't want a GED. There's no one in our program that says, no, I don't want a legitimate job. So our question then becomes, okay, how can we help this student out? And they really dictate a lot of what we do. We have a general program, but students kind of tell us what they want from it. And the first meeting that we have with students is, this program is about you. This is your program, not ours. You get to tell us what you want, and we're going to do everything we can to provide it. And we keep it about them at every single level. They come to us to all of our presentations and breakfasts in front of funders, and I'll talk for a minute and I just hand the ball over to them. I sit back, relax, and I learn more, and it works well. So it really is all about the students, and if it's not, then I don't see it working with this population.
Great. Any other questions?
Fundraising.
Oh, Nate, sorry, name and
Sherry Flash, I work in the area of housing and neighborhood development. I've been working primarily with a collaborative of several nonprofit development groups, CDCs in the Boston area. I don't know what a logic model is. I don't know the theory of change. It circulates around me. I haven't learned that. I do fundraising work. The collaborative doesn't function in that way. There are goals, there are outcomes for creating housing, building units, creating a number of jobs, organizing to get new rail stations built in the community. These concrete, largely these concrete goals, outcomes that the groups say we're trying to achieve to make changes in this area. In fact, we're involved in a big process with TDF that funds us and other organizations, and there's an outside consultant in Boston, and they are bringing in theory of change, and they're looking at a variety of programs, trying to see it together, creating and trying to identify some indicators. But we're steeped in language, and I don't know how much it is sort of across the board in nonprofit that people around really don't know about this. So it's the language, it's the common language, or capacity, what you're trying to achieve. But just what's the status of this language and use of the model of theory of change and the logic model, and is it just everybody's doing it?
Well, it started out at United Way. I mean, they were so. I think those organizations that were United Way funders were United Way organizations were sort of the first kind of adopters of it, and then I think more and more of foundations have. So it may be what realm you're in. I think certainly our health nonprofits in MetroWest now pretty much know the logic model, but I don't know about sort of arts organizations, or I don't know about other ones. But I think it's growing, and.
And we get a lot of private foundations. They say, "What's your evaluation?" And we say, "We're tracking this and that." I haven't had any funder sort of coming back to us. Well, wait a minute. This is in a framework. There's been sort of an acceptance.
I think what happens is that, I think it's, as you were saying, Rebecca, if there's any kind of government funding, or perhaps United Way or Kellogg or maybe Barr Foundation, that there's a certain mindset, and sort of what I was saying earlier, there's certain evaluation culture within certain entities and others don't have it. And if you have been, have not kind of bumped up against funders that require it, then you maybe haven't gotten into it. Which doesn't mean that it wouldn't also be useful, but it might sound like a foreign language. So, I mean, in my dealing, I certainly don't think that all the groups that we've worked with knew anything about logic model or logic model versus theory of change. I mean, this is kind of a whole, other acronym. And I was thinking perhaps that's like sort of the next workshop that, folks who are involved in that would be interested in. But I think we're up against a time. We have 1 minute. So I want to say just... I'm sorry. Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
Yeah? All right. I was going to do a little sum up. Do you want to add something?
No, the only thing I'll say about that is I think the differences between the change in philanthropy too, from charity to social investing. I mean, and with the economy where it is, I mean, if we don't move toward more of a social investing to understand if what we're funding has impact, all those tools are things that help people drive, and stay. It's a blueprint, right? So to have some real way of driving the work of the organization, but for still funders who are still just in the charity mentality too, and whether it's driven by politics or goodwill, it doesn't matter. So the accountability, I think, is a different play. And so just to say that.
Yeah, and I think just building up what Anisha's just said, that it sort of brings us back to why we're in this room, which is we have tight economic times, and so that has, I think, spurred some entities to think more carefully about outcomes from investments, even if outcomes are hard to define for certain populations, certainly hard to reach, and we have to be thinking about sort of intermediate outcomes and measures. But I just want to say, sort of as a final thing, first of all, thank you for all your questions, and thank you to the panelists. It's really interesting to hear. I've just met them, so this is great for me too. But I think that one of the things that I've gotten out of this is the importance for both nonprofits and foundations to be proactive. So in the world of evaluation, and to really understand the meaning and the value of it. And from a foundation perspective, it's great to hear about a foundation that has pulled together an institute. I think that's a real model for other foundations to have grantees talking to one another, because oftentimes it does not happen. We see that very rarely. And for again, just to create these sort of infrastructures where the information that comes out of evaluation can actually be utilized to better circumstances in a more broad way. So thank you everyone for coming. And I guess I'll just put another plug in for There Is Something Next, Please Don't Leave.
Yes.
Amy,
back down
Emily.
in the ballroom is the film presentation, and I've heard it's going to be both wonderful and short. So to encourage everyone to please head on down there, and to also fill out your evaluation form. Of course, everyone here will be doing that.
Okay, thank you.